EA may have completely ruined a potentially great Star Wars game by implementing a pay-to-win loot box-based progression system in Star Wars Battlefront 2, but the upside is that word of their royal fuck-up spread far and wide and instigated potential government intervention that has greedy game publishers running scared. We've already heard from various countries who are doing their own investigation on the matter, but leading the charge is Hawaii State Legislator Chris Lee, who is pushing for the regulation of predatory practices in video games, namely loot boxes or any game that features paying for rewards with an element of chance. When we last heard from him on November 21st, 2017, here's what he had to say.
We're here today to ensure future protections for kids, youth, and everyone when it comes to the spread of predatory practices in online gaming and the significant financial consequences that it can have on families and has been having on families around this nation. This game is a Star Wars themed online casino designed to lure kids into spending money. It's a trap. And this is something that we need to address to ensure that particularly kids who are underage, who are not psychologically and emotionally mature enough to be able to gamble, which is why gambling is prohibited under 21, are protected from being trapped into these cycles, which have compelled many folks to spend thousands of dollars in gaming fees online. We're looking at legislation this coming year which could prohibit access or prohibit the sale of these games to folks who are underage in order to protect families, as well as prohibiting different kinds of mechanisms in those games. We've been talking with several other states as well, legislators there who are looking at the same thing. I think this is an appropriate time to make sure that these issues are addressed before this becomes the new norm for every game.
The video garnered a lot of media attention shortly after its release and only served to fuel Chris Lee's crusade further. A week later, on November 27th, 2017, Chris released another video reciprocating the incredible feedback that his press conference got. He not only announced that he would be using his YouTube channel to keep everyone updated on his plans to keep game publishers with exploitative intentions at bay, he also talked about what's happening behind the scenes since the Battlefront 2 fiasco, and encouraged the gaming community to keep applying pressure to these companies. Here are all the important bits from that.
My name's Chris Lee. I'm a state legislator here in the state of Hawaii, and about a week ago, we held a press conference together with colleagues to address predatory practices in online gaming. And the response has been incredible. We've heard from people from nearly every state, from other countries, elected officials, regulators. I think with this kind of response, I really want to take an opportunity to do something that at least I've never seen before, which is a series of updates right here to take you behind the scenes and inside the politics of our discussions with the gaming industry. And we'll take you step by step through how to be most effective in making your voice heard as a community to make sure that we can put an end to pay-to-win gaming. For all the pushback we've seen against pay-to-win gaming and loot boxes in Star Wars Battlefront and some of the other games that are out there, it's easy to think that this is the end of it and it's going to be done. But that's so far from the truth. The industry's already started to push back. The ESA, which is the trade group representing and paid for by a lot of these game developers, has already started to do the dirty work that individual companies don't want to be caught doing themselves, defending predatory loot boxes and making the case for that, trying to shut down a discussion that could move forward in political circles before it ever has the chance to. And that's what's happening behind the scenes right now. You know, political power is strength in numbers and intensity over time. And if this discussion quiets down, that ability to make change goes away. And that's exactly what a lot of the Wall Street investors in these companies are waiting for. It's what the gaming companies are waiting for. And it's something that, if you want change, you cannot let happen. I think this is something that can be won, but nobody can do this by themselves. We have to do this together. So join us. Come with me if you want to live in a world where people's voices matter, where together we can stand up and protect our families and change the direction of the gaming industry for the better.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Then the following week, on December 5th, 2017, Chris published a new update video detailing his plans for a bill that will restrict games with loot boxes for minors under the age of 21. Here are the highlights.
Today is important because I want to walk you guys through something which is the next step, and that's actually crafting bills. one of the things we have to do is actually turn a conceptual idea like prohibiting loot boxes to people who are under 21 into actual legal language, which can be applied effectively. And we're going to talk with some of our bill drafters to actually figure out how we can turn this into legal language. I'm not an attorney myself. We use our legion of attorneys here at the state capitol to give us a first draft and a first pass of language.
We'd like to prohibit the sale of video games that have gambling mechanisms in them to minors, to anyone under the age of 21. So if you were to buy a $200 sword in a video game, but you knew that you were getting that sword, that would not fall under the definition.
Correct.
But if you were going to spend $200 to buy a percentage chance to get a sword...
Damn, that's an expensive sword.
Yes.
Yeah. We've had so many other legislators from other states reaching out over the last couple days. I think the traction this has been getting in the news and the efforts people have been making to bring this up in community discussions has been really getting attention politically. And so we want to be able to respond to those requests from states all around the country and pass those legislators legal language that would give them a starting point to address this in their own states.
As far as a digital distribution, I do think we can write the law in such a way that it's not just in-store purchases, but also digital networks like Steam.
You can go in, and once the algorithm identifies a player who's likely to keep spending money to buy that one unicorn thing that they're after,
then their chances get lowered. That's
right.
I did read that.
Then they lower the odds, and then you keep spending more. It's absolutely unethical and unfair. So how do we ensure that that doesn't happen too? And I think that's where this accountability piece really comes in. The most obvious thing is prohibiting the sale of games with predatory game mechanics to those under 21. That's something that I think everybody should be able to agree on. And that might be enough, because if you're taking away that share of the market from the gaming industry, they might actually change games across the board for the better. We don't need to change the laws in every state. We just need to keep the conversation going, to keep pressure up, and ultimately get enough attention to this issue so that maybe the laws in a couple states change, but that's enough to compel the industry to build games that meet those laws, stop exploiting folks who might have gambling addictions and others, and actually create better games. What we need to do is reach out to community leaders and elected officials to keep this conversation going. I've linked below a template that is a brief summary. It's a little over a page of what this issue is about, what the concerns are that are being raised, and that'll help educate them so they know what they should and should not do in order to keep pressure on the gaming industry. And what we're asking you to do is take that template, add in maybe a link to a news story about this so that there's additional perspective and credibility, and fire that off to your own state representatives and state senators and elected leaders at all levels.
So there you have it, folks, Chris Lee's push towards what I think is very reasonable regulation. What I love about this guy is that he has the right idea. He understands that the goal here isn't to have the government kick the door down and regulate gaming across the board. He's not trying to have the government control how the gaming industry runs. Rather, what he's proposing is a scare tactic. Pass a bill to limit the sale of video games with loot boxes for minors under the age of 21 in enough states to take away a share of the market so that the gaming industry will have to regulate itself. He said as much in an interview with website Glixel, where he told them, quote, "The fear when you introduce government legislation into private enterprise is that we're going to overreach. This is my fear. Ultimately, it's best for the industry to self-police. The ideal solution would be for the game industry to stop having gambling or gambling-like mechanics in games that are marketed to kids. I know they have a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders, but I think they have a responsibility to customers too. So the ESRB could say that if a game has loot boxes, it gets a 21 plus rating. I wouldn't want it to be a federal law. I think that could be a very slippery slope. To that end, if just a couple states pass the bill that Chris is proposing, it would not only stigmatize loot boxes on an unprecedented level, it would make the implementation of loot boxes enough of a financial liability for game publishers that they would be encouraged to rely on making good, balanced, and fair games rather than on underhanded tactics to make money. It's a great strategy that doesn't push for full government control, but rather for extending current gambling laws to video games so that publishers will have to think twice about their monetization schemes. Because at the end of the day, the main concern is that loot boxes, which exploit the same psychological tick tactics as slot machines are too easily accessible to those who may not be mentally mature enough to resist the addictive highs of gambling real money for rewards. Even the ESRB's own criteria agrees with this notion, stating that games featuring gambling with real currency should be rated adults only. Popular game console and digital distribution platforms and most video game retailers will refuse to sell games with this rating, so games try to avoid the adults only seal like a plague. So if the ESRB actually enforced their own criteria and rated games with pay-to-win loot boxes as adults only, then we wouldn't even be having this conversation. But naturally, with the ESRB's parent organization, the ESA, being paid for and lobbied by game publishers who stand to benefit from unregulated loot boxes, the ratings board insists that loot boxes aren't gambling to protect their financial interests. The ESA also chimed in by providing the following response to the loot box controversy. Loot boxes are a voluntary feature in certain video games that provide players with another way to obtain virtual items that can be used to enhance their in-game experiences. They are not gambling. Depending on the game design, some loot boxes are earned and others can be purchased. In some games, they have elements that help a player progress through the video game. In others, there are optional features that are not required to progress or succeed in the game. In both cases, the gamer makes the decision. They keep using words like voluntary, optional, and not required, but that couldn't be further from the truth when games like Battlefront 2 strong-arm players into purchasing loot boxes by basing the entire progression system around them. It is no secret that games with loot boxes are often built to strategically manipulate players into spending real money to buy them in bulk. Case in point, look at the way companies like Activision are trademarking matchmaking systems that artificially pair novice players with expert players so that the novice will want to emulate the expert after they get their ass kicked by purchasing the items that they own. So while loot boxes are technically voluntary in the sense that nobody's holding players at gunpoint, those who don't shell out extra cash are bound to be left with an inferior gameplay experience. And hell, just because something is voluntary or optional doesn't mean that it can't be potentially harmful. Drinking alcohol and gambling at casinos are just as optional as purchasing loot boxes, but that doesn't mean that there isn't a potential to become harmfully intoxicated by these vices, hence why alcohol and gambling are regulated. Chris Lee put it best in his statement to website Glixel, where he said, quote, "I think the mechanism is so close to gambling when we talk about psychology and the way addiction and reward works. I think whether or not it means the strict definition of gambling, it's close enough and the impact is close enough. I couldn't agree more." Fortunately, no matter what the ESA or game publishers may insinuate, concern against loot boxes has now spiraled out of their control, with legislators like Chris Lee taking the necessary steps to fight for some level of much-needed oversight. I happen to think that restricting games with loot boxes for minors under 21 is a great, balanced, and fair compromise, so fingers crossed that Chris Lee will make headway in this uphill battle. With that, I would like to end this news update. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you found this video insightful, and if you enjoy my content, consider supporting me on Patreon to help this channel stay independent and self-sustained. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Yong Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Yong out.